There's the troll, by the way. I thought we'd put him on the board. Yeah, it's there's certain trolls that limit who we are. Let me give you an example of one. Again, it's an old example of mine, but I remember many years ago, I had a neighbor who found out that when the houses were built, his house is behind mine, and then there's a creek after his house. So the builder, who was building both houses, decided to join his sewer system with mine. And then I have a house that's further back, so that it went all the way down the driveway to the road. And I noticed my sewer system wasn't working so well anymore, and they noticed that simultaneously. And so he came to me and he said, I found out that my sewer system goes through your property, and I need to repair it. So my usual identity, remember usual and emerging? My usual identity is a nice guy. So I try and be a nice guy. So I said, sure. He said, the plumber's going to come through, he'll dig a little hole down to it, and then they'll clean it up afterwards. So he digs a big hole in my garden. He kind of repairs the pipe where he thinks it's blocked. He repairs the pipe. He throws the dirt back on, and there's this huge disaster of a mess, and the plumber leaves. And I think, you know how you grumble? You know when you talk to your neighbor and your neighbor's not there? You're probably at an edge. Okay. So I'm grumbling a little while I'm cleaning up. I say, whatever. Okay, it's done. So a couple of months later, the problem is bigger than we thought. There's another blockage. So he says, the plumber's got to come back again. So I said to him, well, you know, last time the guy didn't clean up all that well. Will you please ask him to clean up? He says, sure, no problem, of course. So the plumber comes, digs another big hole, messes up this gorgeous clover patch that I had, and leaves a mess. Then my neighbor comes to me before I've even cleaned it up, and he says, the guy looked at it, he realizes that the whole sewer system needs replacing. And he'd like an easement through my property to the road so he can put a sewer system in. It's much easier than going over the creek. So I say, okay, well, I guess if you need that, speak to your lawyers, write up something that really protects me, and we'll explore it. So he goes to his lawyers, and they write up an easement clause that messes with me and looks after him. And I look at this thing and I'm a little shocked. So here I am cleaning up the second mess. Now I'm not only grumbling at him, but I'm talking vigorously to him. And he's not there, right? And I think I must be on an edge. Anyone notice? Okay, I'm disturbed by the neighbor, and I'm talking to someone that doesn't exist at that moment. So if you notice you start talking vigorously to people, you might think you might need a discussion at some point in time. So I decided to call him. So I think I'm going to call him and say, okay, no, you cannot have that easement. You got to stop this nonsense. Find a resolution. Clearly the line is blocked. My line is blocked too. The line is blocked. Go deal with it. So I've rehearsed what I'm about to say. So I pick up the phone and I call him, and I notice I'm shaking. I'm really shaking. And I think, and there's a voice inside my head that I never knew existed. It says, Stephen, don't tell you he's going to come over and kill you. Anyway, so I went over the edge, and I left a message. He wasn't there, so I left a very firm message, and he behaved impeccably. He didn't do the thing. He didn't push me. He hated me after that, but he was really well behaved. And he didn't kill me. But I thought about that belief, and I thought, where on earth would I get a belief system that if I stand up to someone, they're going to kill me? That's probably, sorry? How about South Africa? South Africa, yeah, South Africa. So I got in South Africa because South Africa was pretty violent. I was threatened with my life a number of times as a kid. And so that imprinted very deeply, and I never even knew it existed until I was on the phone about to talk to him. Can you see? It's a limiting troll. It disallows me from taking my power in relationship because I have a belief that says if you take your power, people are going to want to take you out. Now, this was kill me. This wasn't symbolic. This troll believed I was dead. So just let him do his thing, which means it's a shocking troll. Can everyone see that? The thing with it is I never even realized it existed. So that's clearly a limiting troll.
So if he was South African, then it would have been a maintenance thing, but because he wasn't South African, it was just limiting.
Yeah, when most South Africans tend to kill each other, so you're right.
Just trying to understand.
Okay, so now let's have a look at the.
Sorry, something happened.
No, that's good. We got more lights. Do we need more
The
lights?
presentation went out.
Oh, less lights. Okay, certain lights. It will come back. So let's have a look at a maintaining troll. So I'm trying to think of a really good example. So let me give you a slightly more complex one because I don't have an automatic, very good one that would be clear. But say I want to leave my job. And the troll says, what about money? That's a maintenance troll. It says, hey, you used to a certain standard of living. Are you sure you want to not do that? Or say I decide to leave my partner. So, you know, I've been divorced before, so I have a little pattern. Let me tell you a context, because you'll know a little about me for a second. So what I noticed is that I was married, and then I had numerous partners afterwards. And I noticed that the relationship didn't work all that well, and I left them, and I got another partner, I left them. And then I realized there's one constant in my relationships, and that's me. So it might not be the partner that's not suitable. Anyone ever thought that? Yeah, it might be that I'm the difficult one. So I thought I might, instead of working on my partners, I might want to work on me. That was a revolutionary thought, actually, embarrassingly. So I began to work on myself, and fortunately I'm with a partner now for a while. So the reason I share that is you can see that the maintaining troll says don't leave. It says, you know that pattern, you know you can go over this apparent edge and do something, but how about staying back, not doing that, and looking at other options? So it maintains an identity, and it has a wisdom in it to say, hold on, this isn't quite the time to do that. Or it's either the timing, or it's the action, or it's like, you know that email? You know when you're really upset with someone, has anyone ever had that? And you write an email and you think, I'm going to flip and send this email. Anyone had that? And it's good, we're getting there slowly. The troll will come back eventually. So you know those emails, and you're about to press the button, and there's a voice that says, Stephen, don't press the button. Ever had that? And I say, I'm going to press the button. And you press the button, and then all hell breaks loose. And you think, I should have listened to that troll. In other words, there's a certain wisdom in it around the maintenance of identity that is also important. There's nothing wrong with the usual identity. It's just limiting if it's only that. So the idea is to really have a look at which trolls are there that are maintaining things, and which trolls are there that just limit us. Does that make sense?
Can I just ask, Stephen,
No.
because I think
Sure.
one of the things that I probably do a lot is that I identify the limiting troll,
Yes.
but then that's too hard because you've got to do something about the limiting troll. So I
Yes.
redefine it
Yes.
as a maintenance troll.
Yes.
Because
Right.
then if it's a maintenance troll, he's doing a good job and you've got to listen.
Right. That's called cycling. So the redefinition, it's very, the truth is there's certain things that are easy to do and certain things that are really hard to do. And sometimes we know we got to do them, but we don't want to. And then you got to think, so the way to work with it, and this is something around working with the trolls, is if a troll comes up, the easiest way to address a troll is just go over the bridge. So, I ask people, have you ever jumped out of an aeroplane? They think, yeah. And I say, how do you do it? They said, I stopped thinking. Or I was attached to someone, you know what I mean? And I went. Or I got pushed out of the aeroplane. One guy told me this morning, he got shoved out of the aeroplane. I said, did you go back again? He said, never. So there's different ways of going over an edge. But the easiest way is if we can just go over and not get fed by the troll when it's time to go over. But sometimes the troll will pop up and it creates a status. You feel the stuckness. Anyone ever felt this? You don't quite know where to move. And the challenge of that is sometimes because you don't know where you're going, you don't have a vision, you don't have a sense, and so that needs to be refined a little more and mapped a little more about what options there are. Or at times you just feel like it's too hard. Now, if it's too hard, there's different things that we need to do. I'm not a believer you should push yourself over an edge. I think you push yourself over the edge and often you'll flip back or you get hurt. So the idea is there's certain edges, of course, we need to be firm with, but always feeling like you've got to press over the edge. That presser, which I know in me, is my usual style of being. I've got to be more gentle with me. So if you notice you press, be more gentle. If you're only gentle, you might need to learn to press a little harder. Can everyone see that? That's the diversity of expression. And so this negotiation with the troll is really, really tricky. And you know, the best model I've ever seen in nature of it was when I watched a little bird fly for the first time. Have you ever seen that? It's one of the most spectacular things. I was in Brisbane with some friends, and they said there was a nest there, and there was a little baby still in the nest. And I went out to watch, and this little, the mother flew out of the nest to a tree, maybe whatever, 10 meters away, 8 meters away, whatever, and was tweeting vigorously. And this little baby bird kind of waddles out of the nest, goes right to the edge of the flippin' nest, and going tweet, 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 tweet. The mother's going tweet, 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 and I think, this is not looking good. The baby, at some point in time, says, I've got to go over the edge. You see, if the baby doesn't go over the edge, the baby never flies, and it's stuck. This thing that needs to occur, and dealing with edges is critical for us at different times in our lives. We get stuck, and there's a certain courage that's needed. Not a stupidity, not a force, but a courage to go over. And so for the little baby, eventually what it does is it throws itself out of the nest, and it heads for the ground. It goes, and I think, oh, this is bad. It's going, and then it opens these wings. It's like, I don't know what it's doing, but somehow it manages to stumble onto a branch, and it starts there panting, for a while, and the mother's tweet, 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 still going at it, and eventually it learns to fly. So that courage to actually go over an edge is the courage we need for the vitality of our life and the enlivening and the movement outside of that stuckness. And invariably when we go over these kind of edges, especially when we've been stuck for a while, the question often we ask ourselves is, what took us so long? And so there's a certain courage to know if we want to stay safe and comfortable. Comfort is good. I'm not against comfort at all. But only safe and comfort by itself, it can be incredibly self-limiting. And so the adventure or the courage to actually go beyond our usual way of being, not in a pushing way. I'm not saying we need to push. When I was young, I'd push really hard. Now I don't need to push. It's an exploration. It's an opportunity, and it's an adventure into that which is beyond which is usual for us. And that adventure is an exciting adventure. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
And so if you notice yourself in a stuck place and things aren't moving, the question is, where's the next growth? And it's not I don't want to make it over simple. We can can it all up and now we got all the solutions today. Because I know for me, some of the major changes in my life have taken years where I wrestle with this thing, but I know I'm stuck. And that at that stuck place, the best work I know is the negotiations around, number one, what is my vision? Where am I looking to? I remember for years saying, what should I do now? And then I realized it's a how. It's not a what, it's a how. So I was asking the wrong questions. And a number of years ago, I thought, well, should I still be consulting? I don't know. And I realized it's not the what, it's the how. But it took a few years to get there. So it's really a wrestling with it, making sure we work with vision, and the other thing is making sure we work and negotiate with the trolls. I have a really cool, let me go back to this for a second. I have in the stuff in blue over there are a couple of patterns around some of the work we can do when we're stuck, either as individuals or as when we're working with systems. Can I just share that briefly? Is that okay? And then we can come back to any other questions. So for me, There's 4 basic areas that I'm aware of. 3 basic, but the one is a little more complex, around challenges that are really worthwhile working with. The first challenge is of vision. And you can see this happen both in organizations, and you can also see this happen in our individual lives. We lose a sense of where we're going, direction. We don't have a sense of direction or vision of what needs to happen next. And this is really, really important. I use the word hunt because it's almost like we have to stay as awake as we can to what pulls us, where life is, where vitality is, and what pulls us in who we are and what we do. And how we do it. It's not just the what, but it's the how as well. So this challenge of vision is really critical. And you can see this in organizations. I can't tell you how many organizations I've been with that I sit with the executive and they say, we got an idea. We want to become a 1 UN or a 1, I worked with them, it was true. They had the concept of 1 UN at some point in time, integrating all the pieces when I was working with the United Nations. So it's a 1 UN or a 1 something health, another healthcare system, or this reinvent this, or some kind of story. And it's not unpacked fully, it's not developed fully, and now it's in the latest idea that's coming from the executive. Have you ever seen that? We don't know what it means, but that's what we are now. Okay. Anything else? And it just doesn't get integrated in, the vision doesn't get embodied, the change doesn't really occur, and now the executive says, great, we're done with that, what's next? Rather than understand that any change process needs a clear, defined vision in it. It really needs to be embedded, it has to be explored in. On an individual level, when we're working with a change process, particularly when the vision or where we want to go isn't clear, to really explore what's pulling us, what's attracting us, what really is vital to us, where our energy is most alive, what we're really drawn to, what we're yearning to, where our passion is, and really begin to follow that too. Is that helpful, folks? So this is both on an individual and organizational level, there's a lot of work that needs to occur. The second challenge is the challenge of familiarity. And this is a real dinger because, where we are, one of the reasons I love to travel is that it presses me to leave home. Does that make sense to anyone? Because, when I'm home, I'm comfortable. I know my bed, I know my routine, I know my phone calls, I know my friends, I know. When I'm camping, in the outback of Australia, up in the Kimberleys somewhere wild. I'm out there, and this guy next door to me, and I start chatting to him. I would never talk to this person, and they're really interesting people. But somehow my life has got narrow so that I close out to so many options that when I'm outside of my usual way of being, open to me in a vital and refreshing way. It's not that I don't like my home and I'm looking forward to going back, but it's really nice to have that diversity. Does that make sense? It's enriching, it's awakening, it's stimulating, and it's enlivening. But the challenge of familiarity can keep us horrifically stuck because we do what we know and we're comfortable with what we know, and the courage to adventure, the courage to think outside of our boxes is really, really big. So the big challenge is the familiarity. In organizations, you can see that so much. People say, well, this is what we've always been doing, therefore we should continue to do it. And you try and implement a technology piece, and heaven help the technology implementation. Unfortunately, because technology folks are often highly technical, they say, okay, this is what you do, and leave and think we've done it. Have you ever seen that in organizations? And no one knows what to do. And they don't follow the system, and it becomes a big change mess. And that's because familiarity often gravitates, and people pull back to what's usual. So it's very hard to effectively move away from familiarity unless it's very consciously handled. Third area is the challenges of resistance. And that what happens is because of the values, because of the beliefs, because of the structures, because of the personal benefits systemically to people, people don't want to change. So if things work for me, why should I change it? So there's often in change, in systemic change, there's all these resistances that get dealt with or get presented. And personally, in terms of our change, the biggest issues that come up, and this is the fourth one, which is really, really big, is those trolls. Those beliefs that come up and get in our way and limit the opportunity for change. Remember Kodak? consumables is the way we make our money. That's a fundamental belief, and I think if anything tripped up Kodak, that was it. Or this system is too far out. Or I remember with the internet, what is this thing? That was my belief. I can't believe it exists. How can everyone talk to each other? Where? Where's the database? How does this work? So just phenomenal actually how we can be limited by our own thinking processes and self-limiting. So that's in terms of change, both systemic and personal change. Is that helpful, folks? Okay, any other questions, either about that or anything we've done so far? Can I keep going? Okay, so I want to talk about how this model applies now to systems and groups. And I want to look at teams. And I will look at when team dynamics are challenging. And in most systems, I'm going to call a system, whatever the system is, I'm going to call it a field. So a field that we're in. The field can be a big field. It can be an individual field like myself. It can be a team. It can be a whole organization. It can be a country. It can be the world. It can be the universe, whatever the field is. And in the field, there's almost invariably a mainstream way of thinking. So when I'm working with an organization, when I'm working with a team, when I'm working with a system, invariably there's going to be a mainstream way of thinking. And the reason that occurs is because of power. So if you look at a team, for example, the leader will often dictate the direction. If you don't like it, then you get fired. Or don't like it, then we'll isolate you and put you on the side. Or people that affiliate with leadership or have influence. So there's different reasons for power. Or they're men. Or they're straight, or they're whatever, they're white, or whatever the games are of that particular culture impact the centrality of the team and the mainstream nature of the team. Can everyone see that? Okay. And they create a defining role of how we operate as a team together. Now, by virtue of that structure, and there's nothing wrong with it, it's the definition of how the team is, but by virtue of that structure, all of the views, attitudes, thoughts, ideas that are outside of the mainstream become marginal. And if a team isn't working effectively and opening to the marginal, they start going underground. And they become ghost-like. Now, the reason ghost is such a good word, at least this is in a process book model, but the reason ghost becomes such a good word is you see a ghost still exists and it impacts us, but we don't see it. So they go underground, and as they go underground, they begin to present through various symptoms. There's a decrease in engagement, there's a decrease in performance, low motivation, attrition, tension, gossip, unhappiness, and you get fragmentations that happen, and the team doesn't work well together. Have you ever seen that in teams? Okay. And that basically occurs for me because of this particular pattern. So as a consultant, what I'm looking for is invariably, because the ghosts are invisible, they don't show themselves. So often when I'm working with a team, I'll interview, in fact, almost every team I work with now, I want to interview a lot of the members of the team to find out what's going on. What are the symptoms? And as much as I can unpack, what are the ghosts or marginal roles that are disallowed and disavowed in that system? Because you see, if I can get to those, if I can get the disavowed roles, I have an opportunity of bringing them back. If I bring them back, some of the symptoms I'm hopeful will decrease. But the challenge often happens, this is very good for consultants, by the way. So if you want to, for consultants, this is our bread and butter, because this is when we get called in, when there's all sorts of problems in the team. So I'm interested in the problem. Can you see I'm going back to the disturbance? Remember the idea of the goats going into the disturbances? I want to go into the disturbance to find out what's in the disturbance, because within the very disturbance itself is often the solutions and the ideas that we're looking for. Within the very disturbance itself is all of the reasons why that's underground, and what's going on in the system that needs to emerge. And as I mentioned, a lot of this occurs due to rank and power. Now, definition of rank by Mendel, the founder of process work, is that one's relative power position in any given system or social interpersonal context. And power comes from many, many things. It's not just positional power, although positional power in organizations is important. It's affiliative power. I know the CEO, I know the boss. My dad owns the company. Doesn't matter what my role is. It can be psychological power. Some people are really strong in teams, irrespective of role. Have you noticed? They just get strong and forceful. It can be a social power that's either education or an ism that's present, some form of that's identified or supported more, especially when you get into, for example, gender. Typically you get into more technology and certain skill-based organizations, and there's less and less women in the organization, etc. So power can come from many, many different contexts. A couple of keys to power, which I didn't write down. Can I share them briefly with you? A couple of keys to power. The first thing is, there's nothing wrong with power. There's a lot wrong with how it's used. You see, often when we have power, people think, well, if I have power, I should give my power up so I don't misuse it. But there's a gap in thinking there for me. For me, the idea is, if I have power, the question is not whether I can give it up or not. Invariably, it's hard to give up. Much easier is to think, how can I use my power well? So that's the question I often ask when folks have power. If you want to know how you're using your power, all you need to do is ask those people around you who will be impacted by your use of power. Because you see, if I have power, I'm really comfortable. Everything's great on this team, isn't it? What's the problem? We're all doing great. If you want to speak, you speak, right? Yeah. And wrong. So what happens typically is, if I have power by virtue of the comfort, I'm not conscious of the difficulty in other people who might not be able to emerge in their power. And this awareness of executives and leaders and all of us is really, really important. I mean, quite recently I was talking to a team, and there was a vice president on an executive team, and there was a vice president in this team, and she just lost her key person. Now, they are friends. She lost them, they've gone to another organization. I said to them, did you do an exit interview of this person? They said, no. I said, can I do one? She said, will you try and set it up? I asked her. She said, sure, of course. I spoke to her, and I got all sorts of gold for the organization from the disturbance. What was incredibly surprising is one of her best friends, who works and collaborated with her for almost 10 years, could not tell her what was really going on, why she needed to leave. Isn't that far out? You think, but she's my friend. We talk about everything. We go on vacation together. But she couldn't talk about certain things, and that's because of the unconsciousness of power and the unconsciousness of the lack of awareness of the difficulty people will have by virtue of the power that we hold. So power is a huge mechanism. So the key is, if we want to know about our power, it's not good to think about ourselves. Ask those people who might be impacted by it. They will know more about our power than we do. You can't change power. The key to power is to actually use it well. One of the most devastating impacts of power when you don't have power is what we do to ourselves through a process that I call internal marginalization. So once you're marginalized externally by the poor use of power, you internalize those values, and you begin to feel weak about yourself. And I'll never forget, there was a teacher that I had. He was a very powerful guy. Very powerful. He'd be in groups, and he has a lot of personal power. And suddenly he was with his teacher, and he would like melt. And he would be this shivering kind of guy. And I'd say, who's this person? It was so weird to see that in all contexts except that one. And he suddenly lost all his power. So the key is what was going on inside him that had placed his power at that moment in the other person. Can you see that? So we place, by virtue of all the correct and incorrect allocations of power. We place our power in others and disavow our power in ourselves. So a lot of our work is to reclaim the power we have in ourselves. Just one last piece about power. Often when I'll go into teams and I work with the team members, that a difficult team will often complain about their leader. So if I think about it from a personal development piece, the person who's disturbing us is the leader. And this is a little complex in thinking, but I'll just share it briefly. For me, what that means is that there's a need for leadership inside ourselves that isn't yet emerging. You see, it's much easier to try and work on changing the other person than work on changing ourselves. I tried that with my ex-wife, okay? How many of us haven't tried that on our partners? You go home and how many of us are still not working on our partners? You know, just slowly and subtly, but at least I don't know if anyone else does it, but I still have that habit every now and then to try and just get a little change here and there. It doesn't work. Anyone else notice? I've spent 40 years doing it. And I'm still learning. It doesn't really work. What really works is when we work on ourselves. Suddenly I work on myself and things change. I think, wow, how did that happen? So the projection onto the leader is a placement of our power onto the other that's marginalized inside us. And the claiming of our own power is often what's needed many times in those people in the organization, especially when I'm working with them. When I'm working with the leader, of course, they need to be aware of their power too. So both sides. Okay, so the internal marginalization that can happen is quite devastating in terms of power. Okay, so let's go back to that model again. Whoops, back to effective teams again. Let's go back to the model again. So, what I like to do in terms of my work with groups is have the mainstream role again and get this ghost role to re-emerge. And this is a complex process. And the reason I say bringing the ghost role out is complex is that when you bring a role out, it's underground for good reason. So it's underground because if it were to come out, it might get into trouble. So if you've been disavowed, criticized, judged, put down, or lost a job because of your view, you don't want to bring that view out again. Can everyone see that? So it goes underground, even if it's useful. So you can imagine at Kodak, going back to Kodak, you can imagine that a technology guy comes along with an idea, it gets pushed down, it goes underground, it gets lost. So a lot of wisdom gets lost because it goes underground. So getting this to come out requires a certain safety. Now the superficial level for me of safety says, do we all agree that we're going to support each other in the room? No repercussions. And that's a nice idea, and it's a good idea. It doesn't work all that well. Has anyone else noticed? Safety doesn't occur because of a request. Safety occurs because of the interactions in the room that create a safe environment. So for me, the next level that occurs is the question, and this is why I say it's a two-step process to bring this ghost out. The first step in the process is to create enough safety for the ghosts to come out. So I remember working with a CEO, and I was called in to work with the CEO because he used to lose his temper. Not the only CEO I've worked with. I'm sure many of us have had CEOs that have lost their tempers. But anyway, in this situation, the CEO was losing their temper and getting angry. And I was asked to come in and work with the team and the CEO on this. So I asked all the team members, have you spoken to the CEO about the loss of their temper? They said no. So the CEO doesn't even realize the impact. But everyone is too scared to speak to them about this. So can you see there's a ghost in the room? And they're too afraid to bring it out. What are they afraid of? If I bring it out, the CEO won't like me and I'll lose either influence or I'll lose my job. These are vice presidents of an organization, I think it was maybe 25,000 people. Big organization. So now I'm working, I see there's a challenge there. So how do we bring this out for the team? Now if I do all the work, which I actually did a lot of it in that situation, they don't grow. Their job is to bring it out. But there needs to be enough safety to be able to talk. So the first discussion that we have in the group and with me privately with the CEO is to give feedback and say, look, the team has feedback for you. I think it's really important you pick it up. I can give you a sense of what the feedback's going to be. It's about your temper, etc., etc., etc. Are you open to the feedback? Because if you're not, we can't change the team. Can everyone see that? I'm bringing out the feedback. I'm bringing out the ghosts. Now, if I don't work with him before, and I don't want to set him up and suddenly he's getting feedback in the group and he's upset about that, but he needs to be open prior to that. Now, as the ghost, as I set this up with the CEO and they agree to it, as we come in the room, he needs to then create an environment with me, which is the second step, where the ghosts can emerge back and be able to give the feedback that they need to. Everyone got that? Everyone see that? Okay. As that occurs, something very special occurs. As this role begins to emerge and become less ghost-like, there's an interaction that occurs. There's an interaction between that, the mainstream, and the emerging role. Now, it's not that the emerging roles are right. It's that the emerging roles have information which without it, we cannot make the best possible decisions. In other words, diversity enriches. A diverse group, a group that has different opinions, is actually a richer group. It's not a limiting group. If everyone thinks the same, you're actually limited by the sameness of thought. When you get diverse opinions and you can use them constructively to come to the best possible solution, you have a diverse and dynamic situation that occurs. So conflict in itself is not bad. It's the inability to work with it that becomes the problem. Conflict or differences enrich. So the opportunity to bring out all of those roles and really work with them skillfully is very, very important. When that happens, I've seen over and over again high engagement, improved performance, greater motivation, increased diversity, and greater cultural cohesion. Okay, now I'd like Trump to listen to this presentation. What happens finally with that is that the system grows. But it requires a courage. The same as going over an edge requires a courage. This requires a courage. It requires a courage to be prepared to hear those voices that might in their very nature disturb the system that we're working with. Okay, that's my teamwork. I know we're going to be getting tired. It's a lot of information to give you. So there's going over the edge. Now, unfortunately, it's gender specific, that one. I'd like to have a slide where the females are leading, but that's the one we got at the moment, so my apologies. But I thought it's a fun slide nonetheless. Going over the edge. Okay, folks, any questions?
I'm interested in when you were taught about working with the CEO,
Yes.
having that conversation with them.
Yes.
If you're not open to the feedback,
Yes.
then we can't go forward.
Yes.
And he said, yes, I'm open to the
Mhm.
feedback. Then you take him back in, and you said you've got to co-create with them a
Yes.
environment.
Yes.
Just interested in that piece and that,
Yes.
the dynamics of how that.
Well, there's a number of things that I'll do. The first thing is I'll see if the team will go over the edge and speak to him. So what we'll do is I'll speak to the CEO. The CEO needs to go in and say, look, I'm very interested in feedback. Obviously, we brought Stephen in or whoever in because we want to grow as a team. I genuinely want to grow. I'm interested in feedback for me. And I would appreciate it as a beginning if you actually have things that we discuss them together. And I know it's scary, I know it's hard, and I promise you, I want them. It will enrich our team. So
What
if
happens
I've
they start to get defensive and
well, they
start to
will,
feel that
yeah.
they-
So what happens is, mostly it's funny because CEOs, by virtue of the rank, are less threatened than other people. If an individual gets feedback, one of the vice presidents, for example, is getting feedback in the room. I've tried that, and that's very, very hard. I'll take it offline. But with the CEO, they're the most powerful person in the room. They're not really threatened by the individuals. And I've seen as a whole that most CEOs I've worked with are much more capable of getting feedback in the room. And if they can do it, it really helps the team. It shifts the team, period. So that's what I've found, Liz, as a whole. But what you might find is if they get defensive, like for example, I had one CEO who got defensive in the room. The group started getting excited. The energy went up. We were going over an edge. I can actually give them feedback. What a relief, and started doing it. And the person silenced it. They went, boom, I don't want to hear this. If this is the situation, I'm going to leave. They actually said that. I'm going to leave. You can leave the organization. I'm going to leave. We're threatened because they love him. He's a great guy. But I'm going to, fantastic CEO, but I'm going to leave. And I thought, we can't go further in this context. And I took it back on myself. That was a difficult moment. I took it on and said, look, I brought it up. I didn't, but I owned it. I said, I brought it up. Bad call on my part. I apologize. Let's move on. And I try to pull them away from it. Unfortunately, it's like having, you've swept something under the carpet. You ever been in that? And it's under the carpet every time you trip over it. So you know that when I work with teams, essentially, I say to them very clearly, this is not a one-time event. If you want a one-time event, I'm the wrong guy for you. I want to go deep with the team and over time. So then straight after that, I want a meeting with him, and I say to him, there's an issue we've got to talk about. Number one is you can't threaten the team that you're going to leave. No, that doesn't work. You can't threaten to leave. And number two, there was important feedback that you missed. What are we going to do with it? So I'm really challenging him. You see, the worst that happens is I'm fired. And then I think, okay, I lost that gig. I'll have to go find some other ones. But you see, for the team, they have much bigger edges than that. So I'm working with him to create the shifts that really are too hard to do in the team because he flips back in terms of defensiveness. Invariably, over time, I've seen every CEO I've worked with around these particular points has changed. Especially because I think most of us, when we're invited in as consultants with teams, especially if we're inviting, if we're instructed in, it's a different story. But if there's a conscious inviting in, it's a pre-selection that will be the teams that are interested in growing. So that's, in a way, we pre-selected in that way. The teams that are very resistant and have an autocratic leadership, if that was the case, and he said, I'm sorry, this is the way I operate, if they don't like it, leave. And if that kind of CEO, I'd say, well, the impact is that you'll lose all of this, and I'll explain to them what you're losing. It's really your choice about how you want to operate as an executive, but if that's what you don't really need me for that. And I'll say, but this is the impact of what you're going to be creating. Oops, let me just grab a little water quickly. Yeah. Is that helpful, Liz, just quick?
Yes.
Great,
yes.
fantastic, yeah. Sorry?
This seems that it's a dynamic process.
Yes, yes.
Do organisations ever get to the point where they learn to do this themselves?
Yes.
So they explore their own re-emergence.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
they can continue
Yes.
to grow.
You know, it's a great question. And organizations get much better. I've seen executive teams become quite superb, really quite spectacular as teams, particularly if they're an ongoing learning curve. What I have found, however, is they aren't trained in our expertise, nor do they have a huge interest in it. So actually what I've found as a whole is that when I start working with teams, I try not to come too often, but for example, teams in Australia, I'll come down 2-3 times a year for a day. And at times we'll work strategically, so it won't only be on team development, but I'll be working with how the team is working while they're working on strategy. So I won't get in the way, but having that awareness is not a skill that's easy to develop, as all of us know. And it's a dynamic skill I'm sharing. It's not a static skill. It's not these are the 10 steps of leadership and or the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I'm actually working with a dynamic model. And by virtue of a dynamic model of leadership, it requires a lot of awareness, and a lot of CEOs aren't quite up to that focus. It's not that they can't do it, but it's just not their nature of focus. They've got a million things in the organization to focus on. So that skill is not one that I've noticed they've honed to the point of not needing me at all. So I tend to pop in a couple of times a year as a way of addressing it, yeah.
I think there's one other really important element of that too, that you're
Sure.
actually not in the team. So I think when we come in as consultants, yes, we've got a
Absolutely.
whole lot of skills that they don't have,
Yes.
but we don't own the dynamic of the team and they do, and that
Yes.
gives us a level of clarity.
Yes. Well, we have a few things. We have a rank because we're coming in as the content expert around this particular area, and how we use it becomes really, really important. And teams really need us at times to use it. So, for example, if I call a CEO on something, they can't do it. They're too afraid. The edges of the trolls are too big. So as I do it, I begin to shift the team. Now, over time, I want them also to be able to talk to the CEO in that example. But I can do it because of my power. But you're absolutely right that we have certain privileges and certain powers by virtue of being external. And it's always the challenge of internal folks too, that they can do things to a point. When I've worked with internal folks, and I'm sure many of us do, where you work externally and then you have someone internal that you're working closely with, it's like a tag team. So when I've worked with them, I'd say, if it gets too tough, I'll pick it up because it's your job. And I want you to be conscious if you leave or not. So at certain risky times, what I've noticed is that when you get to an edge, if we go back to the goats, when I'm working with executives on an edge, it gets hot. And at some point in time, especially the leader won't like me. If they like me the whole time, I haven't done my job. There's a certain moment they don't like me. Now, if we go over that, then they really like me. So it's this weird thing. If we don't quite get over, like, that CEO who said that I'm going to leave, actually did leave eventually. I had that discussion, and they found another position which they were actually planning already and left. And so that's why I said we got to explore what's going on there about the leaving. But when they have gone over, what I've noticed is that then it starts getting embedded and the changes start happening quite rapidly. And the team shifts, especially when it's the leader that's holding some of the challenges, which invariably they are. Any other questions? How's the time? Where are we? We got 20 minutes.
I'm interested, Stephen, the example that you gave there with the CEO, he's obviously called you in.
Yes.
Have you got any particular tips? So I worked with an organisation recently where I was brought in by the board
Yes.
to investigate issues that had gone on between the CEO and the team.
Yes.
And, once again, I was dealing with a CEO who
Yes.
was probably in his early 60s, very, saw himself as very experienced, was highly stressed by the fact that
Sure.
this situation had arisen. There'd been allegations of bullying and all sorts of things that had come with it.
Sure.
And I guess I was also conscious of the fact, I was trying to go through this process, but I'm also conscious of the fact that I'm, much younger than he is, different gender to him, and I'm wondering what tips you might have around something like that.
Well, I'll tell you what I notice around gender. I have a colleague that I've worked with at times, and she can do things that I can't do by virtue of gender. So there's something when I do a certain thing with male CEOs, they can get quite reactive. But she does it in a different way. I think, how did you do that? I want to learn, I can't get it. But she can do things and they just soft melt butter. And I think, how did you do that? And then it comes and then they're open to it. And I think, wow. So one of the things that sometimes gets in our way is age because of a belief system we hold.
Yeah.
Or gender by the belief system we hold. Like I've seen it where I come and sit, I'm working with a female colleague and the focus is all on me. And you can see that repeatedly around race or gender or whatever else, that you sometimes get these marginalizations that occur. But I would actually use that and see how you can use that as a power, because you'll be less threatening. And I can be more threatening in my approach. So you can actually use that in a very, very powerful way. And I've seen phenomenal interventions by younger women facilitators by virtue of that. Than the older executive. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing is it's very complex, and probably the first discussion I'd have when I came in to work with the CEO is to know I'm actually working for the board. You see, it's a very complex agenda because I'm working for the board and I want the best for him. And what I've noticed is that most executives will open when they see I'm behind them. When they don't see I'm behind them, but I'm actually for something else. it becomes really important. And I remember I was working with the CEO actually of an investment bank, and the head of HR came in and said, knew me really well and said, come work with this guy. And he had some challenging things. He was a good guy, but he had some challenging ways in which he interacted. And he said to me, I said to him, I want to be absolutely clear with you. I don't work for the head of HR, I work for you. So I made it very clear of who I'm working for. Because you see, if you're not clear on that, then it gets all complicated. If you're clearer, there's no issue. Because if you've got to report back to the board, you're accountable to the board, then you've got to negotiate with them, how do we manage this? The board has asked me to come in, that must be really difficult for you. But clearly there's stuff that we can explore. Are you willing? How do we work with confidentiality? How do we manage this, given I have to report also to the board? So what I do is I bring all of that up consciously and notice that I'm caring for him in this process. It's really a difficult process for him. He's an older guy, he feels highly experienced, and now is being judged and evaluated, correctly or incorrectly, we don't know.
Yeah.
So is that helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, there's ranks everywhere. And the key is to go find our own rank and how we can use it well. You know, one of the things I remember working is I was asked to go and work with a billionaire in the States. And I was younger and I got into a complex because I thought, boy, he's got a lot of money. And then I saw a video of him with a lot of people and everyone was smiling and nodding their heads around him. And I thought, I better be really direct with him. And I gave him an evaluation. I had to do an evaluation for him that was unbelievably direct, straight up, direct and unequivocally straight. And I thought that was important. But there's a danger in working with people that we have to work on ourselves and our own power, because if you project it onto the other, you get weak and then you just nod your head. So I remember working with ministers of a country too, where I was facilitating a team of ministers of a country. And I worked on myself beforehand because I thought, if I don't take my power and claim my power as facilitator, they will run over me. And in this meeting, there was a meeting between refugees and ministers in the country. And the Minister of Health stood up at one point in time, and I had a new boss. And he was sitting there, and I was facilitating. And I said, the deal is this, you've got 3 minutes, because I know how ministers talk. They warm up after half an hour, and our meeting is only 2 hours. So they're going to take the whole, he would take the whole time. And so I said, I put up the rule, I said, after 3 minutes, I'm going to ding gong. So I had an assistant hit the gong, and your time's up, and we're going to get to another person. So he stands up, and he starts, well, let me tell you, and he starts warming up. So after 3 minutes, I say to my assistant, hit the gong. My boss says, no, that's the Minister of Health, you can't do that. I said, hit the gong. Now I'm in a war with my boss. I said, hit the gong. He says, no, I hit the gong. So he hit the gong, she hit the gong, or I hit the gong, and he keeps going. I hit the gong again. He sat down. Now my boss is red, green, purple. I don't know what colors he was at that point in time, but it didn't matter to me. The end of the meeting was a really good outcome. People, it was diverse views, incredible interactions. There were very powerful people in the room. It was a really good outcome, and I knew the only reason we got there. See, then he loved me again. You know, oh, what a great meeting. We've never done this before, and this was fantastic. And he took all the glory, and he stood up and he took the whole thing about his brilliant vision, etc. And I said, you can have as much as you want. It doesn't matter. But the key was, if I wouldn't have hit the gong, we wouldn't have had the meeting the way it was. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's a certain courage in really claiming our own power and position in the room, because that's what is designated to us. And I think that's what, I'm sorry I missed your name, but that's what you meant, Corinne, that's what Corinne was mentioning too. We have a special power in the room. It's a power beyond that. The question is how we use it really, really skillfully.
That's a challenge for me sometimes, taking
Sure.
out my power in the room.
Yes,
And it's funny
yes.
how I kind of have to keep learning the same lesson
Yes.
2 or 3 times a year.
Yes, yes.
I love your tips on how you, as you say, do work
Pick
on
it up.
yourself
Yeah.
to take it up.
You know what I do, John, too, is that, you know, with my history of South Africa and being killed if I offend someone, it can be problematic in a room too. So what I've also noticed that at times I've had to work on certain things, and each of us will have different challenging areas. Like I remember one point in time I used to feel anxious in the room too. So there's different things that we're going to come up against. And what I've noticed is inner work beforehand is really, really critical. So whatever it might be, and it's really good practicing and seeing what impacts you, what helps you. So for example, with power, when I've seen power, I've actually worked on claiming my own power. And sometimes I'll even do it physically. So if you notice you get a workout and you feel strong afterwards, that's the thing I'd go for. And then I'd go into the room. Psychologically, I remember once I felt anxious. I was facilitating, I think, a group of about 400 people. And I felt anxious. And I was looking at the ocean the afternoon before, and it was like flirting with me. It was like attracting me. And I thought, wow, the ocean. So, you know, the beauty of the expanse of the ocean. And I remember just going into the ocean, feeling this incredible expanse of the ocean and the sense of well-being. Anyone ever had that? I'm sure everyone. So the sense of well-being and the sense of expanse of this eternal ocean. And then I remember walking in the room, and it was a big group. It was like an ocean. I remember looking up, and I saw the ocean again. And there was no anxiety the whole presentation. And I think it was because of my inner work before and trying to integrate that feeling and then bring it with me. But it's easy to say, and I know these things take time to integrate. But for me, one of my big works personally is really, and it's ongoing, I think it's a lifetime of work, probably for you too, but the lifetime of work is moving from external validation to internal validation. It's like somehow moving beyond the need for someone else to approve of me, for me to feel okay about myself. So it's almost like, what is my truth for me? And the more I can find that, the more I can find my deep meaning and my deeper inner myth of what's important for me to follow, the less I'll be influenced by your approval or disapproval, which means my power in the room starts being claimed. So it's almost like mythical for us is what is the importance and value of what I'm about to present. So I found that to be really useful for me too. Yeah, is that helpful, John? Yeah, great. Great questions. Any other questions, folks? No? Should we close early? What do you think? Okay, all right. All right. Listen, thank you everyone for being here. It was just a wonderful privilege and pleasure. I'm very aware that I'm in a role and that there's a huge amount of wisdom in the group itself. I know many of my friends that are here that I've known from before are highly experienced consultants themselves. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for hanging out with us. I hope it was useful. Please, Megumi, do you have everyone's email? So if you'd like this, should we just send it out to, would you like this? Why don't we just send out this PowerPoint? There's another exercise there I was playing with that we didn't do, but it's, why don't you hang on to PowerPoint, and please, if you use it, just kind of credit me. How's that? Is that cool?
Yeah.
All right, thanks folks. Take care. Huh?
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.